So, hello, I'm Cecil Cook. I'm a member of the Baha'i community of Swaziland and Transkei in South Africa. And I've spent the last 50 years in Africa doing all kinds of development work in the field that we named appropriate technology, which is rethinking technology in a way that it will somehow fit comfortably uh, in the hands of the people that are going to use it to create wealth. And so I was recruited to come to a place in South Africa, one of the provinces. It was called Transkei by another Baha'i, uh, and that I had met earlier in Swaziland. And he was already working in the Transkei, providing sort of technical assistance to crafts people that were in workshops around the bus rank in Umtata, the capital city. And then he got lonely and wanted some company, and he managed to recruit me, where I was working for the Peace Corps in Ecuador, training Peace Corps volunteers in how to make very low-cost solar technology for villages. And so I agreed to come there, and he arranged for the University of Transkei to actually pay for my transportation and to offer me a contract to do a feasibility on establishing an appropriate technology program in Transkei. Transkei is an area in the Eastern Cape. There are several big cities that are in that province. But the main city where we worked was Umtata, and it was the University of Transkei that actually invited me to come and do a feasibility study for establishing an appropriate technology unit to see if it would work and if it was something that would give value. And so that's what happened. And I can tell a few stories about things that, there are many things that didn't work, but some things that did work. And one of the things that we discovered is that if you don't know of the benefits of technology, if something is really completely new to you, it just is not something that you think about. And so we had to find a way to introduce village people that didn't have access to sort of modern communication, TV and stuff like that, about some other possible ways for bringing value into their lives. And so what we did is we got a big trailer, and we then put on the trailer simple technologies like fence making, soil cement brick making, stove making, things like that, fence making. And we would take this trailer around in the villages, and we would actually just operate the technology, and we'd explain how it worked, and then we would give people a chance to make some fence or make some bricks. And so that way it became something real, tangible that people could consider. And then when we would go to the villages, they had already some experience of it. And so one of the things we did was we would, through the local school committees, we would invite anybody that was interested in the community to come and have this consultation with us about what was the number one problem in the village. And so sometimes we would have meetings all day in the hot sun, and there would be it could be 200 or 300 people in these meetings, and the whole purpose of the meeting was to define a development problem which there was a consensus, or there was a majority sentiment that that problem is the number one problem in the community. And it often there was division, and some people wanted a road, some people didn't want a road, some people wanted a water system, other people wanted the school more than the water system, other people said, no, it's the road, we need a road, we're tired of carrying people in their beds to the road so that they can be picked up by a taxi and taken to the hospital. So that they would debate these, and little by little there would be a majority position that would come to the fore. One of the interesting things that I discovered is that often women determined the outcome of the meeting. The men were more domineering and more aggressive in arguing for what they thought was the best or the major development problem in the village, but they often would disagree, and then they would argue and they'd exhaust themselves, and then little by little the women would begin to make their views heard, and slowly, almost gently, the women, the position that was, the women were the balance of power, and then pretty much the women determined what the number one problem was. And so often we did school construction. That was really an important one. And the main technology that we had a solution for was to make bricks out of soil, compacted soil with very small, low concentration of cement, about 2 to 3% cement. And so we would, if the community chose to build several school buildings, classrooms, then we knew exactly how many bricks they would have to make, and so we would loan the community a brick making machine, and the community had to buy the cement that they were going to use, and they had to provide the labor to make the bricks. We trained them, and we would sort of inspect the bricks that they were making, and we'd accept them. And so that way, the community actually was investing in their own school, and they were also learning the technology, or learning to make the bricks. So now that, and the technology, actually, the brick making machine was developed by an organization there in the Transkai called TATU, Transkai Appropriate Technology Unit. But the inventor of the technology, a guy named Crispin Pemberton Piggott, who now works as a consultant or contractor for the World Bank, he actually invented the technology, and he moved to Swaziland and created a company there, New Dawn Engineering, and he manufactured what he then called the Terra brick machine, which was the soil cement brick making machine. So we would buy those machines from him in Swaziland, and then we would use them in building schools. And interestingly, one of the things that we would do after a community had built the school, we would give them the brick making machines. We'd give it to the school committee so they could use it to build other school classrooms if they wanted, or they could rent it out or loan it to people in the village that wanted to build their own houses. So that technology became fairly widely known, and the brick that came from that Terra brick machine became known as the TATU block, or the TATU brick. TATU was the name of the organization. And so the government really had mixed feelings about these community-built schools. They were more in favor, actually, after the apartheid system fell, they were more in favor of contractor-built schools, because they thought that our self-help approach was actually extracting value from the community rather than giving value to the community, because the community was poor, and they thought that the political understanding was that development was a way to distribute money back to poor people in the villages. And our approach was quite different. We thought that communities had to have some skin in the game. They had to actually own the project in one way or another, and that way it would become theirs, and they would look after it, and they would have the capacity to maintain it and increase it. So now the government switched after the ANC came to power, and they began to rely mainly on contractors that lived in towns, and the cost of each school classroom doubled and tripled above what we were paying, or the actual cost that we had to mobilize to actually pay for the materials and the labor to build the schools. But now, if we go forward 15 years and we come to a time when the village economy is pretty much weakening, people are no longer really planting corn, maize, and pumpkins and potatoes and so on in their own gardens and fields, and they're thinking about looking for a job in town, and so that there was a big exodus from the villages, and thousands of people crowded into the capital, Mtata, and other cities, and they were creating townships. And so what happened in around the area where we had we had established TATU, the Transkei Appropriate Technology Unit, there were three big townships: Mandela, Joe Slovo, and I've forgotten the name of the other one, Chris Hani. These are heroes of the struggle. That's the names that the people gave to those. And so the people just occupied the land and started to build whatever they could build for themselves. And what happened is that groups of women began to form companies that to make soil cement bricks. They would contract with a person that wanted to build a house, and they would come to the site with a wheelbarrow and the brick making machine, which was quite heavy, in the wheelbarrow, and their tools, and they would bring a couple of bags of cement, and then they would show up, and they would use the soil that was at the house site where they were going to build the house, and they would make the bricks right there. And the interesting thing is that the women had already learned how to run little businesses, because the way they got money from the men was they would brew beer from maize, and then they would run little saloons in their homes, shebeens they were called. And so that was a way that women could sort of get money from the men to look after their children and look after themselves. So the women really had already figured out a way of working together to make a little money, and I think they just reapplied that knowledge, and then they had also learned how to make the bricks from our school making programs, and we probably constructed up to 1,000 classrooms over a period of about 10 years. And so many communities had learned how to do that. And so, you know, after about 5 years of house building in these townships around Umtata, there were thousands of houses that were built using the Tatu brick. And it was, and I think that what we can conclude from that is that there was the groups of people within the local community actually mastered everything that they needed to know to make business using that technology. So the technology went native. It was loose in the community, and it found its own way. And also the interesting thing is local metal workers reverse engineered the Tatu brick maker, which was being made and sold to us into Transkei through the New Dawn Engineering in Swaziland. Local metal workers got examples of the technology, and they took it apart and they figured out how to make it themselves, and then they would sell that. Their version of the TerraBrick machine was being sold through hardware stores in Umtata, in the capital city, and they actually sold it for less than the New Dawn Engineering model or product that we were buying. And so that the technology had totally localized itself. And so one of the examples, I did a study for USAID. I've forgotten which decade it was. It was in the 1980s, I think, and no, 1970s actually. And they wanted me to look around Africa and see if I could find examples of spontaneous technology acceptance or adaptation. And what I discovered is that many of the innovations that have been widely accepted in many different African countries can be traced back to mission stations, where the missionaries actually were simply establishing a way of growing their own food and pumping their own water and so on, and then they would hire African people to work on their farms and to just build the infrastructure that they needed, for their houses and their churches and so forth. And in the process, the African people simply had a perfect opportunity to learn how to new crops and new agricultural techniques and new water supply methods and technology, and then they would and knew how to use new tools, and they would take those. They could use their own values and their own situation and their own economic reality to decide which of those technologies or those plants or those crops suited them, and then they would actually expropriate those things and take them back into their communities. And so there was no program to introduce the innovation. The innovation was drawn by the people based on their interest. And so I think that is a major principle, that often that the harder you have to push something to get it accepted or by the people of a particular community, that the pushing actually creates resistance, and the harder you have, the harder you push, the greater the resistance. And so it that I think is what we discovered. I don't think we set out to discover that. We were simply using school building and a sort of self-help approach to school building that allowed that technology that allowed people to learn how the benefits that come from that technology, and then the groups of women in particular who already had learned how to do small business projects by brewing beer and using beer as a way to earn some money, and they then adapted their business model, and they changed the business model from beer to bricks. And so and I think they discovered that brick making was much less of a headache than beer making, because beer making had all kinds of difficult consequences, because the men got drunk and they would get unruly and so on. And so with brick making, you didn't have to contend with drunken men. And so that technology simply it took off, and that is a success story.